What we're going to be doing tonight is I'm going to be sharing with you some contents of a book that I have loved forever. How many of you have ever heard of the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? Most of you have. It's an old book. It was written by John Gray back in 1991. And that was back, Judy and I hadn't even been married that long when we first were exposed to it. She took me from my mother's breast at a very young age. And so we got into that book early on. And I was teaching a couples group at our old church during those years. And we talked about this quite a little bit. But in all honesty, I had forgotten a bunch of it. And in my years as pastor, and I don't know, probably thousands of hours I've spent counseling with couples and talking about issues and so forth and so on. And over the years, I've used a lot of this information. And never once in all this time have I found somebody looking across the room at me while we're talking about, say, that just doesn't apply to us. It is such good stuff. And I frankly had kind of laid it aside and forgotten about it. But I wanted to share it tonight. And as I said, it's a secular book. And so some of the things that we discover in this probably don't have much spirituality to them at all, but they were accumulated over 25,000 different meetings with people with issues in their marriage. And the principles learned in here, he said in his research that 90%, right at 90% of the people agreed that this is where we're coming from. This is exactly right. And I've heard statistically that you can't stereotype people that well, but usually about 85% of the men-women issues that we understand from this concept and many others tend to be accurate. So there may be 15% of us that say, well, that really doesn't apply to me, and maybe my spouse is more like that than I am. But about 85 to 90% of the people tend to say that this is the case. So we're going to be talking about that tonight. I've got a whole lot of material, so I'm going to sit here at this desk and hopefully look really, really intelligent while I'm doing it. That may be a stretch, but we're going to give it a shot. Also, if you have any questions, we've got an iPad up here, and we can deal with questions that might come up, and I would love to do that. One of the things I want to mention is that when we're talking about concepts like this, let's also not forget that in Christ, we're brand new creatures. And so even the things that maybe are kind of built into us by the Lord, and I want you to hear me on this, a lot of the things that we'll talk about tonight, I believe, are built into us by the Lord, but I also know that the enemy loves to come and corrupt that which God has tried to do. And so a lot of times we're dealing with sin issues, even within our makeup and the way we think and the way we feel. And we'll deal with a little bit of that in practical terms later. But this whole thing is, to me, very indicative. And let's just start out by trying to define the general differences between men and women. And also bear in mind that we've lived through a cultural tsunami, basically, of trying to dissolve the lines between the sexes. And that is very, very difficult to deal with sometimes because you are what you are, but the world is telling you all these other things. And we've kind of adapted some of that into our psychology, I think. But here's the deal. We're going to divide men and women into two categories. And as the title of the book dictates, he said, we're so different in our makeup that we are speaking different languages. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and they got together and they had an attraction and so forth and so on, and so the analogy goes. But how we view life and how we process information is so different. How many of you have heard before that the number one issue in marriage is communication? And it pretty much is. Because when communication breaks down, then all kind of things start to go awry, and you don't understand what's going on. You make assumptions what's going on, and so forth. So here's the thing. he breaks down the men from Mars in this way. He says that on Mars, men wear uniforms, and they identify with what they do and what they can accomplish. Men don't read psychology today. They don't read Self. They could care less about People magazine because they're into things. They're into doing things. They're into anything that expresses their competency. And the uniform is kind of an image, because on a uniform you can usually tell what the person does. They got their name on there. The kind of uniform they wear pretty much tells you what they do and what they're competent at. And so men primarily identify themselves by what they do. And so that's one thing we need to have an understanding about. Now, women, on the other hand, he likens the men to Mr. Fix-It, number one. Number two, the women, on the other hand, are folks that really are deeper emotionally than men are. And he calls them the Home Improvement Committee. So if you want to know how your marriage is doing, talk to the lady in the group, because she's going to be able to access that better, and she's going to be able to understand that better. The man would likely be prone to measure the quality of the life and the marriage by what they've amassed, what they've got, what they get to do, how they're known in the community, and their competency on a number of levels. Women, on the other hand, gauge their well-being according to the studies that I've seen, basically by how relationships are going, how they feel about others and how others feel about them, and how there's community and communication that's open and warm to them. And so it's kind of an interesting difference there. But can I just say that being a man, we can kind of go sterile with life. A guy can live in an apartment with very little furniture, and he can just kind of get by because when he goes to work, he's got all the right tools. He feels good about that because he has everything in his truck that he needs to get his job done, and his boss thinks he's doing a good job. And when he calls on a client, he's able to answer their questions, and he's able to take care of their stuff. But then he goes home to a sterile world and works on stuff. But then he falls in love with a Venetian, and he goes home to somebody who has put color into the place. And she wants to talk about his day. And the numbers that I heard back in the day were something like, women speak something like 35,000 words a day. Men, by their very nature, speak something like 12,500. And they use those when they're out there, talking about important stuff, doing important jobs, quote unquote. And they come home, and there's a lady there, especially if she's got little kids. She's been communicating on a third grade level or less all day long, and she still has 33,000 words that needs to be shared. And there's a conflict set up there because guys, here's one of the big things. Guys only talk, for the most part, when there's stress or when there's problems or whatever, and we all have those. Guys only want to talk about a problem to fix it. Ladies, I want some love on this. Ladies like to talk about problems to feel better. I had a couple in my office this morning, and I ran this by them. I said, let me just ask you a question, because they were talking about something that related, and I brought this point up, and the wife is going like this, The guy, here's what happens. The guy, how many guys do you really love to hear, we need to talk? Anybody love to hear that quote? We need to talk. Because when we talk and there is an issue, men think that it's their responsibility to fix it. And the only reason we're talking is because I have failed. And this situation exists because I have failed. And remember, men get their self-image from competence, feeling like they've got it, like they can take care of it. And they come into a situation and their wife or their significant other says to them, well, this is going on. I'm worried about this, or I'm feeling depressed about this or that or the other thing. And from her point of view, she just wants to kind of air it out and figure out what's going on maybe and express her feelings, and that's very important. And it relieves her stress. But little does she know that on the other end of that, he's taking that very personal, as though he has failed. And now he's got to figure out, what on earth am I going to do about this? And a good bit of the time, this stuff is not even organized in some logical point after point kind of way. It's just stuff that's, that's built up and needs to be shared. Does anybody understand what I'm saying out there? And so do you see how this communication is already at cross purposes? She is so glad that she's able to share what's in her heart. He's taking it personally and doesn't have a clue how to deal with it. You see, because on Mars, guys don't talk about their problems. The only time they talk about their problems is if they're completely stumped and can't figure it out. And they find somebody in their life, in their world, that some guy that they feel knows more about it than they do, and they can ask that person very pointedly, how do I deal with this? On Venus, all the ladies have a master's in psychology. And they love to talk about stuff, relationship stuff, not just theirs, but everybody's. It's their world, and they love it, and thank God they do, because we're boring. And they want to talk about all this stuff, and on Venus, it's a show of love and respect to offer advice without being asked, to share, and it's a sign of love to anticipate the need in someone, and to just share and to bring it out and to open the thing up and help them and love on them and talk about stuff that's not good. And it's when this comes together, it's an offensive thing on Mars for someone to suggest what you should do, because you haven't asked them. That's why we call it the Home Improvement Committee and the Mr. Fix-It world. And then the other thing that happens, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but the other thing that happens is, how do we deal with stress? How do we deal with stress? And the classic thing here is that a man goes to his cave. And the reason he goes to his cave is that he doesn't want to hear anything. He goes to his cave with one agenda in mind, and that is to figure this solution out for whatever issue is going on. And here's the problem. Men tend to put 95% of their energies, their mental capacity, into that issue. And ladies, when they get on a roll talking about then they're really feeling good because they're being able to share all this stuff, and he's racking up issue after issue that he thinks he's got to deal with. And what happens is only about 5% of his mind is engaged in that conversation once he identifies a need that he's going to have to figure out. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And she will look at him and say, "Are you listening to me?" And of course he said, "Well, sure, I can tell you everything you said." But she knows good and well he is about 1,000 miles away from this issue that's being talked about. Because he's already gone to his cave. He's in his cave. And he's mulling this thing over, and he's saying, "What am I going to do?" And the longer that he has to struggle with that thing, the more incompetent he feels. He doesn't come out of his cave. And the bad thing, during that particular time, he is not engaging with anybody else, at least on any deep level. He's functional. He can handle what's going on at work. He can do other things, but he really has a hard time engaging emotionally during that period of time because he's working on this thing. This thing is everything until it's no longer a thing. Men, am I getting close to the truth? It's not that we want to be like that. It's just the way we're wired, because the hunter-provider thing that God wired into us causes us to feel like I'm incompetent unless I can fix this thing. Good example might be, I don't know if this ever happened to any of you guys. It's happened to me several times. We're going someplace and I'm not finding it. And Judy's trying to help me find it. She's pretty good. But I'm a man, and I can find it. I got this. Stupid stuff like that. We're late for the party or whatever we're doing, and I got this. I can find it. I know I can find it. I'm not finding it. And she will either say, "Well, let's try MapQuest," or why don't you call and find it? "Well, I got this. I know I can find it." And see, even little stupid stuff like that can cause tension between people. And it shouldn't if we just didn't feel like I've got to do this. And here's the thing. Men don't only think I've got to do this, I've got to figure this out, but I have to do it by myself. I got to do this by myself. I got to figure this out. Well, little stupid things like that can add up to a lot of tension and a lot of resentment, and the wife is thinking, "What in the world is wrong with you?" But it's down inside there, especially if you've had a failure or two, it's not going well at work, or the kids are acting up, or you're not getting along, or whatever it might be. All this stuff adds up, and little things like that can cause interruption. Probably not in this group, because this is a very spiritual group, but some people have these issues. And here's where I'm saying that I believe these tendencies we've got can be so perverted by the enemy that we think it's our right to be that way. I don't have the right to disengage because I've got an issue I'm going through. And it's very important that we don't just say, "Well, this is the way I am." Because I'm persuaded that it may be the way we have been perverted to become, but it isn't necessarily our destiny. We can exit that trend anytime when we're walking with the Lord, because there's so many places there in Scripture where we're told how we can begin to access the grace of God and how we can become different people. And we're told from the get-go that we're rewired to be a brand new creature. So let's don't get comfortable with these stereotypes that we've got. Let's see what we can do to break out of them. But if we understand each other, it's a little easier to see when this is going on and back away. And I'm sitting here teaching this to you tonight, and I have to admit, there have been years since I even thought about it. How many conversations have I been through? How many situations have I dealt with where I didn't even take into consideration the communication I was receiving had an end in mind that I misinterpreted? It's so important to understand this stuff. I was reading in 1 Peter where it talks about men dwelling with their wives in understanding. And I think that's so important to understand, that we need to understand how our mate ticks and how they think and what means something to them and so forth and so on. And it's so easy just to say, well, we're just not getting along. Well, or we've fallen out of love or whatever. And a lot of times it's nothing more than the fact that we have made assumptions about our mate that really aren't fair, maybe aren't even true. Maybe they are true, but we don't understand how they got to that point, that we think there's something wrong with them. And then we entrench ourselves in this kind of behavior and grow more and more distant as time goes on. So it's really good to understand how this stuff works. And, ladies have such a heart to share, talking and getting things out on the table and dreaming dreams and nurturing. See, that the Lord created in a mom a unique ability to nurture that guys don't have. We can learn it. The grace of God and the Spirit of God causes us to be able to be more nurturing as time goes on. So we don't say, well, guys just don't have that. No, we can grow into that. And that's why I think when God puts us together, we see how to do that. We see how to do that. And the logic-driven mind of a man is a blessing to a lady that feels her way through life, because feelings can be distorted and they can be wrong. And so it's a good thing to have that buffering agent there on both ends of that picture, and it makes life fuller. It makes us more user-friendly to the world around us and so forth and so on. So you see what I'm saying? We need to understand this, but we don't need to feel like we're locked into this behavior as though we can't do anything about it. And so I think that's key. And taking the time to kind of understand what our bent is really, really helps us to be understanding of each other. I really respect a lot of ladies in my life. Judy's one of them. Rebecca is extremely sensitive to the needs of people around. So I've watched this up close and personal over the years. And I love people and all that, but I'll tell you what, I don't have the interest to sit and listen to everybody's story. I mean, I'm a bottom liner. I can get there quick. In fact, I can almost tell you what your story is going to be after we've been together 5 minutes. After, thousands of counseling appointments and dealing with people over the years, it just, I don't really need to hear everything about every person that interacts with your life to figure out how to fix it, I think. But half the time, fixing it isn't the issue, is it? Half the time, just expressing that and being part of that whole thing and interacting with people on an emotional level is part of the deal. It's part of the healing. And so it's kind of a crazy thing. I may be the only one in this room tonight that has that issue, but the word is that men are headliners and ladies are detailers. And that's pretty much true from my experience. But a lot of times the devil's in the details. You need to know the details before you pigeonhole somebody into a situation, or you figure, I've got this figured out. And that's a real failing that most of us guys have. Let's just say, here's a scenario. You come into the house, whether you're both working or one of you is working, it doesn't really matter what the case is. And your loved one, your wife, is really obviously stressed about something. And on Mars, when somebody shares their stress with you and their question with you about what's going on, it's an invitation then to listen to a few minutes of that and then propose a solution. Guys, have you ever tried that? How'd that go for you? And what happens is it gets rejected. In many cases, it gets rejected because the point was not the solution. The point was the discussion, the interaction with the information that's going on, really telling the story, really getting into it and understanding where people are. And the guy's, he's already checked out. Remember, 95% of his brain is going toward finding a solution. And he's got it now. He's got to figure it out. Here you've been struggling with it all day. I got it, honey. I got this. I can tell you what we need to do right now. I'll tell you what you need to do right now. That really goes over well a lot of the time. And so that is shared, and it's kind of lands with a thud. And then what does he feel? He feels rejection. Well, that's the way you feel. Figure it out yourself. Well, she's not trying to figure it out right now. She's just trying to find out what she feels. And that's the way God made her. And we don't understand that. We're dense. Don't need to talk about it if their solution is not in view. Somebody's texting me to tell me I'm doing the wrong thing here. I can tell it right now. So, hey, have we got that video ready? We showed that a couple of weeks ago. It's called The Nail. We're going to show it. This will give you a visual of what I'm talking about. So let's just run that right quick.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
You do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
Sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way.
Oh, man. You know, it's like that guy in the film there. I mean, obviously, he's really wanting to help. He didn't have a clue. He didn't have a clue how to help. And there's not being able to help is slow death for a Martian. That's what he's here to do. And as long as we measure our effectiveness or our value or our worth in that relationship by what we can fix, there's probably going to be a frustration quotient there. And ladies, if you can help us, you know, just understand that you can honor a Martian by always assuming he can solve the problem unless, you know, by himself, unless he's asking for help. In other words, when you see things in your man, any male, maybe even working with in a work environment, understand that as he views his problem, it's embarrassing to him. Men do not like to talk about their problems. I can tell you 99% of the people that come for counseling are not set up by the man in the equation. Because it's admitting incompetence at some level or other. And not that they don't want help, but they figure, listen, I just need to get alone. I need to think this through. I need to figure out what to do. And so it's so important that you gals understand kind of how we're wired. I'm not saying that we should stay that way. I'm just saying that our default setting is to get quiet, to disengage from those kind of discussions and try and figure out what to do. And usually guys don't come out of their cave until they feel like they have figured out what to do. So, but the problem with that is that when we go to our cave, the ladies in our lives feel ignored. And they begin to internalize that, well, you know, he must not love me, or he doesn't want to be around me, he thinks I'm irrelevant to his issues or whatever, and you know, it just puts this distance in there, and we're working at cross purposes again by our natural bent that we have. And so if we can understand how we process our stress and our problems, we can begin to find ways to work with that. And rather than saying, he just won't talk. He just won't talk. Yeah, you're probably right. He doesn't know what to say. Until he has an answer, he doesn't feel like he's got a response. And so it's a very hard thing. But guys, we can grow out of that. There's so much gain by opening our heart. And when we open our heart to our loved one, they feel intimate with us. They feel like we've let them into the storehouse of our heart. And that's what they're really interested in. They may be proud of you because you can build cabinets or you can fix the car or you can do whatever. They may be really proud of you for doing that, but they really love you more when they find out what you're afraid of and what's bothering you and what your dreams are and frustrations may be and all of the rest of that. And I have to admit, I don't get that. I don't get it. But I don't have to get it. It is what it is. And it's amazing how when we do learn to open up, and we do learn to talk about things like that, it's amazing how that can lead to prayer, that can lead to unity, it can lead to a lot of things because we feel like we're on the same page. And there's an awful lot of people in their marriages that are in competition with each other. And it's probably one of the biggest problems of our day that there's been a demasculization of men and a masculization of women, and that the roles are kind of being contorted from what they used to be and what God has ordained them to be. I was reading, 1 Peter here, and listen to this. It talks about, give it context. It says, Sarah obeyed Abram, calling him Lord. And a couple years ago, I made a suggestion to the ladies about a conference they could have, and it was this. This was the title I put in front of them. I said, Sarah called her husband Lord, and you should do the same. How many of you know that didn't go anywhere? And I was joking, of course, but the bottom line of it is that there was this pattern that the Lord put in life. And the book of Genesis tells us that Eve's desire was unto her husband. And that sounds wonderful. But in the Hebrew, it literally means Eve's desire was to rule over her husband. As a twist of the fall of man into sin, that competition was set up, apparently. The scripture is very plain about what it means right there. And I'm stunned that it says that, but it says that. And so it must be something that God's trying to let us know, that competition that exists between men and women for control in a marriage probably has demonic origins. And once we understand that, we might want to back off from that and quit being autocratic if we're men and quit being assumptive. Because when men feel incompetent, they back off. And ladies have the ability to take over because they're nurturers, and they have an interest in making that family everything it's supposed to be. And sometimes men become silent partners in their marriage and ultimately resent that, and it doesn't work out well for anybody. And so it's a good thing to understand what the enemy has tried to do along the way. And I'm joking about calling him Lord. You know, that's not what we're saying, because you're equal partners, heirs together of the grace of life. There's no difference between male and female in the kingdom of God. It is the same blessing and the same honor and the same authority. And when we come together, but we realize we've got different roles. Men have, on the order of 85 to 90% of the time have logical thought patterns that help to work through complex things and set order and set tradition and set those kind of things and keep law, if you will, in the way life is supposed to be. But ladies have that unique ability to fill that out and make it beautiful as opposed to just a structure. And when we understand that, we think, God, you're really wise. You're pretty good at your job. And he is. And so, but we need to understand each other's roles. But going on, it says, husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. It's a whole mouthful of stuff right there, but the bottom line of that is that men are to be understanding. And when it talks about being the weaker vessel, that's offensive to people today especially. But it doesn't mean they're weak people and they're just basket cases or anything like that. It just means that physically and emotionally, a man could literally overpower them and treat them poorly and literally squash the life out of them. And so basically, and that happens in a lot of cultures. Women have no rights, and they have no say, and they have no position. And so this Bible was written to the whole world. And basically the idea here is don't be overlording your spouse, men. Live with them according to understanding. Realize that they have a God-given role, and it's a big one, and you're heirs together of the grace of life. So don't be looking down on her. Don't be trying to run her life. Don't be trying to manage every little thing. Don't be trying to pressure her, and certainly do not use physical fear. We're a team. And until we're a team, that's not really a marriage. And so we learn to respect the weaknesses. I mean, our ladies know, men, that we're a mess, in terms of being sensitive. And we can learn to be, but the sensitive gene usually isn't the dominant gene in a man. It's a get her done kind of guy, Get her done. We got a job to do. We got to fix this. We got a list. We got to get it going. We got to get it done. And we want you to compliment us about that. That's not written in the marriage agreement, but it's there. And so we can be pretty obtuse about things. And that's something we need to learn to not be. And be interested in things that it's just really not in our wheelhouse. He makes a statement here, and he says, without understanding, they will likely grow further apart. When she feels ignored and he feels like she's always talking to him about problems and so forth. Without understanding, they'll likely grow apart. He says this has little to do with how much they love each other, but rather on how much they understand each other. And I think that's very, very true. I've stressed this already before, but remember, just like this little video right here, a Venetian finds relief from stress by talking about it. And he made a long statement and developed this whole idea that doesn't make any sense necessarily, but to me. But what he did say was that ladies tend to, once they feel like they have your ear, guys, they may go from one stressful thing to another. Have you ever heard this phrase? What's wrong? Everything. Everything. Everything's wrong? Remember, you're talking to a guy that's processing information, looking for solutions. Everything is wrong. Did your car start? Is the heater working? No, it's fine. It's fine. That's fine. Everything's fine with that. Well, you said everything was wrong. But everything's not wrong. How is that rational? But you see, she just found new age lines in her face. Her aunt's been sick for 2 months. She's got a doctor's appointment. It doesn't look good. The neighbor next door hurt herself at work and can't work anymore. And their little dog's sick, and they had to take it to the vet. And all of that stuff is real. This guy's sitting there going, glad we could talk. And she can go literally from real things that affect them to things that affect the family on out, the friends, the neighbors, or fears that could just happen someday. It's all relevant in some way. I'm not sure how, but I'm just saying that it can go there. And this guy, remember now, his filter says, if she complains about something, it's my problem. And she's feeling good because we're expressing, we're sharing. And that's good. Because she's reacting based on what she's carrying. And she's been able to share it in an intimacy setting, and he's listening, and he's absorbing it, but she has no idea how he's processing it. Because this feels really good. Can we just share some more? Sure. Yeah, let's do that. You know, and so you get what I'm saying here? And he goes, he leaves that situation with a list of issues that somehow he feels he's got to come up with solutions. Or maybe he stops her midstream, hey, babe, this is what you need to do. And he's thinking how a man would react. Yeah, what can I do? Yeah, what do you think? What do you think the answer is? But she's gone, you're not listening to me. I can tell you everything you said. You're just not listening to me. And it's an impasse. And then he goes to his cave, and he's working with 95% of whatever limited intellect he's got on this situation. And she feels like he doesn't love me anymore. His feelings haven't changed. He's just loaded down with a project. And can you see where I'm coming with? I'm not making fun here. I'm just saying this scenario, I have seen it hundreds of times. And she starts making assumptions about his feelings about her. And he starts being very frustrated because she always is complaining about stuff. And neither one of them are doing those things. Now, let's just say that you might be a person who picks up on all that stuff as a lady. You're really, it really bothers you, and you carry it, a lot of it. And how many of you know it can build up over time? And the world can start to look really negative and hopeless and all of that kind of thing. And you find yourself talking about that stuff all the time. There can be an unhealthy place there. And we're told in Philippians chapter 4 that we're to be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving to let our requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So we can come over the edge with some of those things and begin to be overwhelmed by those things. And not only will we be overwhelmed, but we'll overwhelm people around us because it's the constant fear and frustration and pain and all of that. And so he gives here a recommendation. He says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. These things do, which you have learned and received and heard in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. So can you see that the solution is not just to constantly be pouring out all of this stuff, but to edit that before the Lord? To begin to think about the good and the wonderful things that God is doing, and to mitigate some of that angst that's there, because you may be putting yourself in a situation, and you may be putting your mate in a situation where it becomes hopeless because there's just so many problems in the world, and we have no way to grapple with those problems. Does that make any sense? Can you see where I'm coming from? That's the part of this thing where the enemy can begin to contort it and begin to take a good thing and turn it into a deception that becomes very harmful for not only the person themselves, but for their relationship, because pressure is being put on the other person to help with things they can't help with. But I think it's, I love the guy's response to the nail thing when he got the point. She's not hearing me about this. That she's feeling this. She's feeling this thing. The feeling is more important than the particular reason for it. And he says that has to be really, really hard. And did you notice her response? She was touched by his concern. She didn't care much for his idea, but she was touched by his concern. And I think there's a lesson for us there. That what people are feeling is their reality, especially in this day and time. I mean, what you feel, we're being told that what you feel can even determine your actual sex. I'm identifying with this or that. And so we are very feelings conscious today, and if those feelings, good, bad, or indifferent, if they're invalidated, and this is one thing I've heard so many times, and I think it's worth sharing as we close, is when men do not listen and put the weight behind what they're hearing that their wives or girlfriends are feeling, that wife or girlfriend feels invalidated. They feel like you're not seeing me. You don't really know. My feelings are important, and you're not validating me. And that somehow detracts from her self-worth in a big way. And so we just need to understand how to do that and how to balance. We've talked about the men, how on the one hand they need to do different things. When they're 95% into their problem, they cannot ignore their kids. They cannot ignore their wife. They have to learn. And here's a fail-safe, guys. And ladies, maybe you can understand this too and see this in your guys. You can be having a conversation, and you can be dealing with some real emotional things that are going on and so forth, and all of a sudden the guy is gone, and he's heading out in the backyard to play some basketball or to watch a football game. And here's what guys do. We find when we've got a big problem we know we can't handle, one of the fail-safes on dealing with our stress is to go get into another problem of some sort that we can handle. For instance, play some one-on-one with somebody, work on the car, mow the yard, play a video game. Well, whatever you feel you can be successful at when you're not feeling very successful, one of the ways guys deal with stress is to disengage from the stress and go solve a small problem so that they can re-engage and work on the big problem again. And that's something probably would be hard to understand unless you've been there with the man's mentality. So when you see your guy do that, ladies, just understand he's working on the problem. He's only got 5% available to me right now, and try and understand that. And if he disengages like that during a conversation, here's a tip that he gave in the book, which I think is a good one. And you see you're talking and nobody's home, just stop talking. And pretty soon he'll snap out of it and he'll say, what? And you say, I just waiting until you re-engaged. And you can go on. And because you know when it happens, and that's one way of showing some honor to the situation that's going on, and without yelling or going crazy, it's you can re-engage. So anyway, we've run out of time, and if you have any questions, we'll probably be dealing with a little bit of this next week, and we'll deal with those questions. You just email them or rebuke me or whatever you want to do, but. I hope this has been helpful, and really give some thought to it. Really give some thought to it. Why don't you go ahead and stand?